Are you interested in learning more advanced resin casting techniques? I'm Marcy McDonald with Pacific Northwest Suburban Homesteading. Last week, we learned about two-part epoxy resin basics. Today, we will cover UV resin, bubble removal, colorants, and other techniques.
So the other type of resin that you will encounter on the market is UV resin. It comes in a single bottle. There are not two parts to mix. It hardens with exposure to UV light, which could be sunlight, but we speed the process up using UV lamps. That's also why the bottle is black and opaque, so no light can get through and cause it to set up in the bottle. UV resin molds are clear. They're not the opaque white of the two-part epoxy resin molds, because when you shine the UV light on it, it needs to get to the resin from all angles. So comes from the top, comes from the side, comes from the bottom. Today I'm actually going to be attempting to set some chips of malachite into a pendant form. This is not clear like a UV resin mold is, but it's very mirrored on the back, so it will reflect any UV light that comes through it back up. So hopefully it will set properly. It's very simple. You need some sort of mold. You need your resin. And in this case, I am using a UV lamp that fits over the mold. There are UV flashlights, and if you want to do it the slow way, you can set it in sunlight. It just takes longer, but it will set. As I did with the two-part epoxy resin, I'm going to pour a little in the mold first. I have to move quickly with this because it has already been exposed to UV light. Spread it around with a little bit of a toothpick. Gonna sprinkle in my malachite chips. Spread them around and cover them with a little more. Get one more piece in there. There's one piece that's taller than the mold, so I'm going to pull that out and put something else in its place. All right, and now that I'm basically happy with the way that looks, I'm going to put the UV lamp over it, and we wait for the lamp to go off on its own. Don't stare directly into it. It is UV light and you can hurt your retinas, so you can look at it indirectly. Looks like it just went out, so I'm gonna check it. That is quite hardened. I am going to give it a second treatment with UV light. It doesn't hurt to treat it a second time, just because it is not clear all the way around as far as the mold goes. I just want to make absolutely certain. So I'm going to do a second round. These are very much like what you would see in a nail salon for having acrylic nails put on. And it's done. Just like that, easy peasy. You have a cute little gift for someone you made out of leftover rock chips. There's pros and cons to either way. The two-part epoxy, you don't need the special UV lamp, but it does take a little longer. The UV version, it seems to be a little more expensive, but either way, it's really fun. Well, these have been sitting for a little while. They still need about 24 hours to sit, but I'm noticing that there are a lot of bubbles on the surface of this one. We can let them sit and hopefully pop on their own, but one thing that'll pop these resin bubbles almost immediately is heat. Don't melt your molds. Don't set anything on fire. Do a nice quick sweep with your flame and it's now a bubble-free surface. We're going to be debubbling the resin before we actually pour it into the mold. And we're going to do that with a vacuum chamber. There's actually two different methods for debubbling your resin aside from using a blowtorch, which is a vacuum chamber, which is what I have, or a pressure chamber. The point in either of them is to remove the bubbles from the resin that you have mixed in your mixing pot before you've poured it into your mold. The vacuum chamber works by sucking the bubbles out. The pressure chamber works by squishing the bubbles out. When you purchase your resin, you need to make sure that it has a good, decent working time or pot time, which is how long you have for it to be in your mixing bowl after you have mixed it, but before it starts setting up and it's no longer workable. I have about 15 to 20 minutes with the resin that I'm working with. Debubbling it takes maybe 5 minutes, so I have time, but I will have to work quickly once we start. So this is a vacuum chamber setup. This is the pump. It works by basically sucking all of the air out of this. It is missing a little cap on the oil reservoir, but as long as I don't turn it upside down, it's not a problem. This is the vacuum chamber. This little pot here is going to seal and let all of the air come out of it. So it is a chamber. It is also called a pot. Please do not call it a chamber pot. How it works is that I have two on-off levers for the flow of oxygen here. This lever controls the oxygen that's being sucked out by the pump, and this is the release valve. When it's done debubbling, I let the air out, or excuse me, actually technically I let the air in this way. This valve will remain closed until that process is done because we don't want any debris or moisture or anything blowing back through the tube and into the pump. When we get the resin mixed up and put in here, the first time we start debubbling it, it is going to foam up like a very angry glass of root beer, which means always use a mixing pot that's at least twice the volume of the amount of resin that you're mixing up. So I'm going to mix no more than about to here with the resin, so it has the chance to foam all the way up without spilling all over and ruining the inside of my not chamber pot. As usual, gloves, not latex, because again, I am allergic to latex. And so we have our part A and our part B in equal measure, and a good stirring spoon, this nice little plastic spoon here. Part B. And again, we're going to stir it for a couple minutes here just to make sure it's well mixed. So as you can see, I have stirred this so vigorously that there's a lot of bubbles in that. We need to remove all of them before we pour this because these bubbles could get trapped in the final product and it would look terrible. Here we go. Place it in the chamber, but not directly under the pressure valve because it could collect moisture and possibly drip into your product. This doesn't have a locking seal mechanism because this silicone seal will actually squish into the metal and make its own seal. The dial is like a pressure gauge, but it's actually going negative. We're going to be going minus approximately 30 pounds of pressure. Look inside. So when it reached about minus 30 pounds of pressure, I locked the valve so it remains a vacuum in there, but the pump no longer needs to be running. And I'm just gonna let it foam for a minute and let the bubbles burst. When I release the valve, it's gonna go flat, just giving it about a minute. So when I break the seal, again, I'm releasing this vent valve to let all of the oxygen exchange with the vacuum through this side so it doesn't spit anything back into my pump. Little violet, I probably could have done that a little slower. And now we're gonna do it again. You do this about 3 times to make sure you've gotten all the bubbles out. I think you can go one more round. I'll let it out nice and slow again. So now I can just see what look like a bunch of surface bubbles. So I'm going to give it a real quick treatment with the blowtorch. We did have a little bit of splatter in the pot. That's why you always want to line the bottom with a silicone baking sheet or something similar to make cleanup much easier. So we're going to be doing a much more complicated mold. This is a trinket box that's shaped like a rose, and rather than just filling it with resin and rocks, we're actually going to give it an ombre effect using colored mica powder. Mica powder can be used in multiple ways. It can be mixed into the resin, or it can be painted onto the outside of your mold edges with a brush or a cotton swab. This is going to be the top of the rose. These are the petals here. So I'm going to get into the petals with this little brush dipped in red mica powder to just put this beautiful pearlescent sheen on the very tips of the rose petals. Mica powder is just a soft, like loose powder. I'm just getting in here. This mold has already been treated with mold release. And I'm just painting it in there very carefully. So this is going to color the outside of the resin without dyeing it all the way through, which means we could actually either use crystal clear resin, or we could use resin that has been dyed another color with a different shade of mica powder. I think I got all of them pretty well. Just double checking my work here. And so all the tips of what will form the rose petals have now been painted with the red mica powder. Because this is a much more delicate and I would say more artistic pour than our simple little ice cube molds, we're going to be debubbling the resin before we actually pour it into the mold. Now, in addition to painting the mold with the mica powder, I am going to be putting some crushed red glass in this to give it more of an ombre effect. So again, start by pouring a little bit of resin first to make sure it gets in all the cracks and crevices, and there are a lot in this particular mold. Also, once you have debubbled your resin, pour fairly close to your work. You don't want to pour it up here and just beat more bubbles into it. Gonna roll this around to make sure it gets in all those crevices. Probably put a little more in actually, because this mold is fairly deep. Now I'm going to sprinkle some of this crushed glass in here. A little more. Now that I've got the crushed glass spread around fairly evenly, I'm looking at this, and this is a very deep cavity in this mold. Resin is not cheap, so rather than filling it up with just resin, I'm going to put some filler in there. Remember earlier when I said that clear and opaque rocks will just disappear into the resin? This is what they're used for. I'm going to stack them carefully in the middle so that they're covered by the crushed glass, but they're going to take up a lot of the room so I can save my resin for other things. Making sure not to get them touching the side because we don't want them visible from the outside. Now for a little more fun, I'm going to put a hint of color in the rest of the resin that I have. I could use this pink, or I could use just a little bit of this red that I used to paint the tips of the petals with. Just a little bit is going to dye the resin slightly pink, but it's of the same family that the red is, so it's going to look like a true ombre effect. Just a little bit. Carefully stir, because you don't want to beat more bubbles back into it. Now you're getting a slightly pink resin. Maybe just a little more. So this is the top of the rose, which is basically the lid of this little trinket box we're making. Just gonna poke it around to make sure everything is solid and none of those rocks that are my filler clear rocks are going to show. So I'm just making sure they're not touching the sides, and also stirring the pink tinted resin in a little more carefully. This is now the bottom of the rose. It's going to be upside down while I'm pouring it, so these are actually a few more petals in here. I'm not going to try to reach the paintbrush all the way down in here, but I am going to fill it with a little bit of the red glass just to match the lid. So we're going to start with a little bit of resin. And again, this was already pre-treated with mold release. And it's fairly easy to see that it's filling the bottom of the mold fairly evenly, but I could use a little more just to be sure. All right, I'm going to pour in some of my crushed glass. I'm not going to fill it all the way, I'm just getting essentially the tips of the rose petals. Press that down in there. Some more resin. It helps to do it in layers, a little bit at a time, to make sure that you've got everything covered. Pour slowly because it could overwhelm the capacity of the molds and spill all over the place. Because this is fairly thick and viscous, it doesn't flow like water. So that's full all the way. Again, we have some surface bubbles here, so we get to play with the blowtorch again. Now we're just going to let that set. I do have a little bit of resin left, so just for fun, I'm going to pull out another candy mold and make a few small hearts. A little petroleum jelly. I'm going to fill each of these little hearts about halfway full with this leftover resin. Never let this go to waste. Always have some backup molds on hand just in case you have miscalculated how much your original mold is going to need. So let's embed something in this really pretty. I have a bunch of iron pyrite, aka fool's gold. Let's see what that looks like. All right, so there's some pyrite. And then let's put some shiny red crystals in it to mix it up. Just gonna stir them together. And let's top off the molds. And that just about perfectly used it up. I meant to do that, and it came off perfectly. Okay, so it's been another 24 hours with our set of resin projects here. These little hearts, one thing I want to mention is that resin contracts very, very slightly as it dries. So there's actually going to be a tiny sharp ridge around the edge of the resin projects in this mold. When I take them out, all I'm going to do is take a nice little nail file and just buff that down a little bit. So let's demold these. These are super easy to pop out. So here's the result. And like I said, you can see this sharp little ridge that will just buff off very easily with a file. Once I get them cleaned up, I'm just going to attach a little magnet to the back, and they are perfect little gifts. Well, let's take a look at our rose. This is the top. This is the part that we did the painting with the mica powder. So let's take a look at it first. Again, sometimes it's a little hard to get the mold started, but once you get it, it stretches and slides off pretty easily. Oh, isn't that beautiful? So this is the lid, and this is the base. And you can see why it's very important to have mold release on the inside of the mold. This would be very sticky if I hadn't done this. There's your little rose box.
I hope you enjoyed Shauna's demonstration of more advanced resin casting techniques. There are so many possibilities for beautiful and fun items that can be made out of resin, whether you stick with basic 2-part epoxy or decide to branch out and try UV resin in the many ways to add color and interesting details to a project. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Until next time, be curious, keep an open mind, and never stop learning.
There you go. There you go. There you go.